Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ASDC's Thursday Train to Win webinar. Today's topic is 2014 Ballot Initiatives, and we have the team over at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center that are going to talk with us about some of the work that they do and how it's going to impact the states in 2014. So I will, before I turn it over to them, I just want to remind you of a few housekeeping items. The first is that you are in listen-only mode as an attendee to today's webinar. So if you have a question, you're welcome to type it in the questions box, and we'll make sure that we get your question read out during the Q&A period. Additionally, you can click the raise my hand icon, and we will make sure to get you unmuted. Next, we hope you'll track with us on social media, tweeting about some of the great, interesting facts and giving a shout out to our friends at BISC for some of the information that's shared on today's webinar. You can use their Twitter handle there at the bottom of your screen, or you can use our hashtag for our Train to Win webinar series, hashtag Train to Win. There are a couple other Twitter handles if you want to give a shout out to the ASDC. You can do that using those social media tags below. Just to give you an overview as to how our agenda will flow, we will talk a bit about ballot initiatives with the team at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, and then we will have a Q&A period to make sure we get all of your questions answered and get you further information regarding their work or any additional questions that you may have. So with that, I will turn it over to the team at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center.
Hello. So today my name is Shahan Dada. I am the political coordinator here at BISC, and I'm joined by Josh Levin, BISC's VP of Programs, and Elizabeth Lucas, BISC's political director. BISC is what I like to call a public utility for the progressive movement, and yes, I may have stolen that from our executive director, Justine Server. We assist our allies across states, regions, issues, and type of initiative. We don't pick and choose there. And while we get into this a little bit further along, BISC provides honest information, useful tools, and strategic advice to progressive campaigns and organizations. Ballot measures at one time used to be used as a progressive organizing tool. Unfortunately, the right realized the power held within a ballot initiative and began to use them to take away rights, be those rights women's rights, voting rights, or workers' rights. And now we're trying to reharness the power that a ballot measure and a ballot initiative holds as a progressive organizing tool, and we're trying to do that in a way that brings about proactive change rather than defensive work. So at this time, Elizabeth is going to talk about 2012.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Renee, for the opportunity to talk with all of you today, and thank you, Shahan. As Shahan said, I'm going to give you a few examples of the work that BISC did in different states during 2012, where we saw crowded ballots in a number of states, some used to ballot measures and some not so much. In July of 2012, we brought together a number of the key progressive California ballot initiative operatives running campaigns to talk about how they could work together. Ultimately, we worked with partners on Props 30 and 32 to raise revenue for education and an anti-worker initiative, as well as one to repeal the death penalty. We conducted focus groups with our research team that informed the creation of the California League of Responsible Voters voter guide that was mailed to 500,000 households. It had a Facebook page and a Twitter account that was made, and we also engaged new voters via email who had registered online that year for the first time. Moving on to Florida, again, we brought together various organizations facing threats on the ballot via legislative referral that dealt with various issues, including TABOR, a threat to teachers, and personhood. But in total, there were 12 different referrals that year on the ballot. The campaigns shared polling with Mike Bosian, this research team's pollster, who looked at all the surveys to find commonalities amongst the campaigns in terms of message and universe. We helped create the Responsible Voters for Florida's Future voter guide, a Facebook page and Twitter account that had one message: stop the Tallahassee politicians' power grab. And I'm sure those of you that are from Florida can chuckle at that. And each of the groups pushed that to their network. We had 500,000 copies mailed, and the piece was also used for canvassing in targeted districts. and obviously within the same targeted universe. After the election, the data was actually shared with all those who had participated from the different organizations, and all of the referrals were defeated that year. About a year out of the election in 2012, BISC was asked to do an assessment of the strengths and areas for improvement within the Maryland Same-Sex Marriage Coalition. All of their recommendations were ultimately taken, and as we saw, the campaign was successful. BISC was also asked to do an assessment of the 2013 New Jersey minimum wage campaign that, again, was successful as well. Going back to 2012, in Michigan, they faced a ballot with 6 different constitutional amendments on it, which is more than they had seen on a ballot at one time since the 70s. So BISC came in twice in the summer to help the campaigns talk about strategy, despite all the outside factors that they were facing. And there we helped create the Michigan League of Responsible Voters, if you're seeing a theme here, through joint polling and focus groups. And subsequently, we did post-election polling there as well. The League was really active in social media. They had a very active Twitter account and a Facebook page, as well as an immense online ad campaign. And there they had 3 different flights of that voter guide get mailed out to absentee ballot voters within the universe, and they were also used for GOTV, and were able to help reduce some of the roll-off that we see on down ballot or on ballot initiatives. This was asked to go to Missouri at the request of Big Mo, the Ballot Initiative group, in the summer of 2012 to develop a strategy on proactive measures. They decided to move forward with 2 of those measures, which ultimately failed, but only due to technicality. And they asked us to come back again in May of 2013 to facilitate a meeting to strategize thinking forward to the 2014 and the 2016 ballot. BISC was involved in signature collection quality control for Ohio's same 2011 repeal of SB 5/issue 2. Those of you that were there can remember that well, which we all know was successful in its repeal of the anti-worker law, limiting collective bargaining rights. And ultimately the various League of Responsible Voters groups, and depending on whichever name they had within each respective state, in California, Florida, and Michigan, continue to exist to this day, and they're actually being built upon for future cycles. They're doing a lot of proactive work around that within Michigan through Progress Michigan specifically. And lastly, BISC conducted post-election research in Washington and Maryland on the intersection of the marriage initiatives, the same-sex marriage initiatives, with the other measures that were on the ballot, and in Michigan on the collective bargaining initiative. And that wraps up 2012. But as Shahen had mentioned earlier, when she gave her introduction about BISC, some of the work that we do is providing technical assistance. And since January of this year, we've responded to 72 technical assistance requests from 49 different organizations and campaigns in 19 different states. Some examples of the assistance we provided include detailed campaign analysis, landscape updates, research and sample campaign documents, and the issues that we've worked on have included LGBT equality, reproductive justice, workers' rights, gun violence prevention, pension protection, and voting rights, and those numbers climb every day, so that's a little outdated at this point, and we're looking to help a lot more campaigns between now and November. And with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Josh Levin here. Like they said earlier, I'm the Vice President of the Program for BISC. And as Elizabeth talks about the marriage equality measure in Maryland back in 2012, I was actually the campaign manager for that. So when Elizabeth talks about technical assistance, a lot of the requests that we have come across are for measures that are on the ballot already or are about to come to ballot. Shahen was talking a few minutes ago about the history of ballot measures, and while they were originally a progressive tool, we have been on the defensive a lot, and much of what BISC is focused on right now is starting to turn that around and make ballot measures a tool in the progressive toolbox for achieving good policy and achieving other electoral goals. And strategic planning is a big part of that. And what we can do for all of you out in the States is, as you look ahead to 2016, 2018, redistricting in 2020, we can help you look at what your policy goals are, what your electoral goals are, and how ballot initiatives might be able to help you get there. For instance, there are a number of states looking at minimum wage initiatives this year. We helped some folks in the planning part of that put together their research programs to figure out the right way to author the initiative, or to help them build their coalitions. And a big part of what we do in the strategic planning part is help coalitions and our partners make decisions on whether now is the time to go or not. Sometimes you've got a great policy idea, something that your partners and your coalition is really passionate about, but the time is not now, either because the electoral landscape doesn't look good or because the coalition has not reached the level of strength that it needs to. We can help you reach that conclusion. We can also help you decide that, in fact, you are ready to go, that you've hit your milestones, that you have hit your targets, and that now's the time to go ahead and move forward. And then the other piece of all this, which I'll hand back to Shen here in just a second, is ballot measure reform and what the process looks like.
So ballot measure reform is a little bit of a nerdy subject area in that I love to track it. So in a lot of legislatures, and even on the initiative side, we're seeing organizers and partners in state decide that they want to help change the ballot measure process, be it extending signature gathering deadlines or creating a single subject rule for ballot measures. So we work with our national allies and partners on ballot measure reform. So we're involved in the reform process by providing counsel and monitoring for change in states. We also work on the issue with our Lawyers Guild, comprised of some of the foremost ballot measure lawyers and experts across the country. And our guild is chaired by Joe Sandler, many of whom you know. We also work with our board members who serve on our Ballot Initiative Reform Committee, which sort of gathers on an as-needed basis to advocate for change in certain states, but also to guide us with advice on strong reform efforts that we can either support or when we see reform efforts that we don't really think are for the best for the progressive movement, to try and work with partners to say this isn't the right time for this, or this is why this is not good for us as a movement. So not only do we provide technical assistance and strategic planning and track the ballot measure reform process, we also have a research team that Josh can talk to you a little bit about.
Great. So BISC has an ongoing research project. Every year we conduct a number of focus groups. We choose some potential ballot issue topics to research at the direction and in partnership with some of the folks that we work with around the country. And for 2014 and looking ahead for the next few years, a couple of the biggest and most popular items on the agenda are protection and expansion of voting rights and economic justice issues. So for 2014 here at BISC, we are looking at voting rights issues in a couple of different ways. First off, and in some states this is possible, in other states we have to be a little bit more narrow, but establishing a fundamental right to vote and all the things that might flow from that. In other states we're looking at smaller efforts, but equally or even more important in some ways, things like early voting, things like absentee voting, things like same-day registration. And what we do is we work with our partners and go into the states and we test these various measures. We ask voters and we sample different populations so we can build as complete a picture as we can. We test some of these different components to see which ones will be more popular with the voters, which ones will require more education, and which ones perhaps the electorate just isn't ready for yet. And we make that information available to our partners, including folks like you, to help as they look at these issues, be it legislative or more in our roundhouse, the ballot initiatives. On the economic justice side, again, like I said earlier, we've been part of some of the minimum wage initiatives that are moving this year, and we are trying to work with some groups who are interested in putting minimum wage issues on the ballot for 2016 and beyond. Part of what we're doing here is helping again to test which strategies towards increasing the minimum wage are going to be most effective and easiest to pass. And we're also looking at improving and expanding the models that are available to campaigns and to folks in the profession, to our political professionals in the states. We're looking at building a model that will help us identify voters who are willing to pay a little bit more for public services. So that could be a levy for education. It could be overturning something like the Taxpayer Bill of Rights tabler in Colorado. We are trying to add to the toolkit, make that something that's available on the file in as many states as possible, and make sure that it's applicable to as many states as possible, keeping in mind the differences between states that have an income tax or don't, have a sales tax or don't, and whatever the many combinations could be. High service, high tax states, as well as lower service, lower tax states. And again, the focus groups that we do on an annual basis are a big part of that. We've just wrapped up a set of those taking place in Ohio, Arizona, and Colorado, where we were testing a few local initiatives, including Voter Bill of Rights work in both Ohio and Arizona, and a potential recall measure that may be on the ballot in Colorado this fall. One of the other tools that we've been working really hard to develop through our focus groups and through some other research also is voter guides, especially in states where voters aren't used to seeing initiatives on the ballot, or in states where the number of initiatives can get a little overwhelming. We've really homed in on the importance and the ability of voter guides to help provide a little bit of clarity to the very voters who we want to have come out and vote, and to the groups that we want to have be persuaded to go our way on those issues. And we've come up with what we think are some pretty good guidelines, both for general populations as well as for targeting specific groups of voters there. All of this research is qualitative, I should say. We are looking forward to and looking for opportunities to test that in quantitative fashion. But again, that's advice that we can make available to anybody who is facing ballot initiatives this fall or down into the future.
Thanks, Josh. So I think this is the part of the presentation that everyone is most excited about. It's the landscape that we're looking at currently for 2014. So on your screen there, you should see a mix of purple states and red states and blue states. The red states are where we're on defense. The blue states, obviously, are the ones where we're running proactive measures. And purple states are where we've got a mixed bag of both defensive work and proactive work ahead of us for the proactive or progressive movement. So I want to talk about a couple of themes first that we're seeing. So Josh talked about economic justice as one major theme that we're seeing for the 2014 landscape. So specifically looking at minimum wage, we're seeing increases on the ballot in several states and active campaigns running in several more. Currently on the ballot, minimum wage will be featured in South Dakota and Alaska. And there's active campaigns running in Arkansas, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Nebraska, we recently learned, is considering doing a minimum wage campaign. They're looking at their polling numbers and doing some research on whether or not they should go this year or go next year, or even in 2016 when they decide to run, and if they decide to run. We're also seeing several local initiatives. We've seen Seattle get a lot of press coverage, especially lately on the national landscape, increasing their minimum wage to $15 an hour following the move that happened in SeaTac, just a small city south of Seattle, and as well as proactive campaigns happening in San Francisco, San Diego, Oakland, and Davis, California, where they're running a coordinated campaign in those 4 cities. When we look at women's health, it's a second trend that we're looking at very closely. We haven't seen this much activity on ballot measures attacking women's health issues since 2004. There are already 3 measures that we're going to be fighting in November. Those states are Colorado, where personhood is on the ballot, North Dakota, where it's also on the ballot by legislative referral in a personhood issue, as well as Tennessee, where they're looking at a constitutional amendment on privacy that would potentially ban abortions outright. And that is also on the ballot by a legislative referral. But we also saw potential talk of 4 initiatives qualifying for the ballot in California, Oregon, Ohio, and Mississippi, but those still have not qualified, so we're hoping that they, knock on wood, do not. And the last thing I want to talk about is voting rights. We all know how important this is to every issue that we care about, and there's been a lot of activity in the frame of voting rights this year. There are 4 proactive voting rights initiatives on the ballot or looking to qualify currently. Those are in Ohio with the Voters' Bill of Rights. Missouri is trying to expand early voting for 6 weeks prior to Election Day. Signatures have been submitted, so we're waiting to see what happens and if it qualifies. In Connecticut, early voting was placed on the ballot by the legislature. It doesn't create early voting outright, but it changes the Constitution in such a way that it would allow the legislature to create early voting opportunities in the next legislative session, should they so choose to. And most recently, we saw Illinois, the legislature there qualified for the ballot the constitutional right to vote, which would create constitutional protections for voting on the basis of race, religion, language, and other protected classes, thus providing a legal basis for challenging voter suppression laws that could arise in states. But unfortunately, we've also seen threats to voting rights pop up. One of the biggest ones that we're tracking is the elimination of same-day voter registration in Montana, which was referred to the ballot by the legislature there. The Missouri legislature was looking to try to qualify voter ID and restrictive early voting measures to the ballot as well. But we also saw voter ID try to qualify for the ballot in California, Nebraska, and Nevada. But we don't think at this point that they will qualify. But if we're going to look at the state-by-state landscape, in Alaska, as I mentioned, we see minimum wage that has qualified for the ballot. Marijuana legalization has qualified for the ballot there as well. And we're looking at the Bristol mining measure that has qualified, but we don't support it. And there's a referendum on oil tax cuts and a lot of other things that we're watching on the local level, especially with the Anchorage collective bargaining referendum, which qualified for the November ballot. In alphabetical order here, in case you're wondering how I'm doing this, being this west to east. But we're looking at California, where health insurance regulation has qualified for the ballot, and doctors are being pitted against trial lawyers in a medical malpractice cap, where signatures were submitted to qualify the measure for the ballot. And we're supporting a sentencing reform measure called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act that would provide revenue for education and change the way felons are sentenced in state. But we're also opposing a measure that would speed up the death penalty process. So keeping an eye on those. In Colorado, the biggest thing that we're tracking right now is an anti-fracking initiative, which would stop fracking in the state, and several similar initiatives have been filed. We're looking to see which one of those will qualify. Florida had 3 issues referred to the ballot this year: medical marijuana, funding for a land conservation program, and court stacking, which would allow the next governor to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, which under current law that would honor, would allow to, it would go to the governor elected in 2018, not the governor elected in 2014. In Hawaii, and I believe there's someone on the call from Hawaii currently, school vouchers has qualified for the ballot, which would publicly fund non-public early education programs, and again, that was by legislative referral. We talked a little bit about Illinois and their voting rights ballot measure, but we're tracking 2 measures that are circulating that are connected to the rights in terms of term limits and redistricting or fair mapping. In Louisiana, there's 6 referrals. One would protect existing funding for nursing homes. Another would limit tax bills to odd years. There would also be an artificial reef created in Louisiana. There's a measure to make it easier for the state to clean up abandoned properties, and looking at tax breaks for veterans, and changing the qualifications for a commission on wildlife. Massachusetts has 2 large economic justice issues that we're tracking: paid sick leave and minimum wage, both of which we are hoping to qualify and that will, ideally. Michigan has minimum wage, a wolf hunting ban, and a fracking ban, just like Colorado does. And Missouri, which we mentioned earlier, has a progressive early vote initiative, but we're also closely watching an initiative that would eliminate due process for teachers, thus eliminating tenure for all public school teachers. If I've lost you there, we're in Montana, where, as we mentioned, we're looking at a same-day voter registration elimination that might eliminate same-day voter reg. And Medicaid expansion is currently circulating. In Nevada, an early education initiative has qualified for the ballot. Labor is currently split on this, and so we're watching it closely, just like all of the other ones. Oregon has a driver's card referendum that has qualified. A yes vote on this referendum would uphold a law that allows anyone to get a driver card in the state of Oregon, whereas a no vote would overturn the law. Marriage equality has gathered signatures, but they're waiting on the courts to decide what's going to happen, similar to what happened in Prop 8. There was a challenge to an existing law that bans same-sex marriages in the state. So once the courts decide, the campaign will decide what to do with those signatures that they've currently gathered. In Tennessee, not only are we looking at that constitutional amendment that would restrict women's health issues, but there's also a ban on the income tax in the state that has qualified. And last but not least, Washington. And this is one of the first states where we're seeing two countermeasures that have popped up. I-594 would allow background checks or expand them in the state, whereas I-591 would eliminate background checks for guns purchases. At this time, we'd like to thank the ASDC again for hosting us and for allowing us the space to talk about ballot initiatives, which we are very excited about. But we're also going to open up for Q&A if anyone should have questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shahan, and thank you to Elizabeth and Josh as well. If you have a question, again, you can type it into the questions box there on your GoToMeeting module. You can also click the raise my hand icon, and we'll make sure that your question gets answered. Okay. So one question that I actually received via email was, what does, in an election year, and I guess 2014 would be an example, what does your on-the-ground strategy look like as far as the way that you organize and, you know, how kind of the work that these organizations, that these ballot initiatives produce, how does that kind of manifest into a field operation, if so?
Hi, this is Elizabeth. Well, actually, BISC does not actively organize. We don't run the campaigns, but we are there to provide the assistance to the campaigns. So whether that's, again, helping them coordinate, whereas an example in a state, we might look to a state that has multiple campaigns running different ballot measures, then in ways that they can save money and work together by coordinating on field efforts. And maybe one other campaign were to be able to tackle the communications efforts or coordinate the communications efforts so that they're not doubling up and trying to attract press at the same time and stepping on one another. So those are the different ways that we would be able to help out, or that we would look to help, in addition to, as Josh was talking about, a lot of different research capabilities that we've had in the past, and producing those voter guides with the work of the campaigns and funders in order to be able to get those out to folks. But we are, as an organization, are very small, so we do not actually manage that aspect of it.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And we'll give folks a moment who want to still type questions into the questions box. But in the meantime, I'll just remind everyone attending today's webinar that we do have an evaluation form that'll come to your inbox shortly after our webinar wraps. We'd love for you to give us feedback both on how you enjoyed today's webinar, and also if there are additional follow-up questions for the BISC team or questions you have about training in general through the ASDC, please do use that as an opportunity to give us some feedback and ask your questions. All right, we have
one of the things that we would just recommend to folks. Oh, sorry, we had a question?
Yep, we actually do. But you're welcome to finish your comment first.
Oh, I was just jumping in while people were raising their hands and putting in their questions to say one of the things that we recommend everybody think about here is, again, how the ballot measure process could impact your other elections as well as your policy goals, and to start as early as possible. We were talking with one group that's planning a pretty big voting rights initiative for 2016 earlier this week, and it was really great to see a group thinking about it early, plotting out what all of their milestones are going to be over the next 18 to 24 months, and that's even before they become a full-fledged qualified ballot measure in their state. But they are starting to build their budget, starting to build their coalition, and that really does significantly increase their likelihood of success.
Great, thank you. The next question we have here is, are there compliance issues that state parties should keep in mind or be aware of when they are working with BISC?
I'll let Elizabeth chime in here in just a second, but the short answer, of course, is that it depends on your state. Typically, ballot initiatives have their own committees organized under your state's compliance rules, and they may have an associated 501c4 or even a 501c3 organization along with them. That kind of legal support sometimes gets outside of our wheelhouse, but when it does, we have partners that we can direct you to, and other folks like Shahan was talking about from our Lawyers Guild. But I think Elizabeth can tell us a little bit about how that's worked in practice.
Yeah, what I would just echo what Josh said, and one of the best resources that folks have out there is the Alliance for Justice. They are very good at working with folks and within a C3, C4 capability, and really being able to walk you down some of those lines. They've done trainings for different organizations that can really show you what you can and cannot do in coordination with these groups. And as Josh mentioned with our Lawyers Guild, we have what we would recommend is reaching out to a ballot measure expert, not just an attorney, not somebody who does voting rights or who does electoral politics, but someone who actually is an expert within the ballot measure field. And if you don't know who that might be in your state, by all means reach out to us, and we can help do the legwork if we don't know someone offhand. But we do have those members of our Lawyers Guild that we would refer everyone to.
And there's some really great opportunities if you do that the right way. Early work on ballot initiatives as well as some public education about the issues that you're confronting can in some cases be done using 501c3 dollars, so dollars that can be charitably deducted by the donors, and that's often a big help in raising early money and can give you a real nice head start. Other times a 501c4 entity, by doing some public advocacy work, can raise and spend money under slightly different rules than your state political committees might have. Again, none of this should be taken as direct legal advice. Please do talk to counsel in your state, and as Elizabeth was saying, let us help you find somebody who can give you the right advice there.
Yeah, and I would just add one more thing. When I was in Ohio during 2011 for the SB5 Issue 2 repeal, I actually ran the Ohio Democratic Party's efforts to help the campaign. And while we weren't able to, not to get into the weeds, one of the things that we were able to do as the Democratic Party was we had staff and volunteers that had access to a voter file, or to the Ohio Democratic Party's voter file, that we were able to use in order to recruit volunteers that then filtered directly to the campaign itself, which we were not the campaign. So that was a way that the party was actually able to help out this ballot measure campaign without being directly a part of the apparatus.
Great, thank you for those responses. Doesn't look like we have any additional questions in our questions box, so I just want to thank Elizabeth and Josh and Shahan and the team at BISC for spending some time with us today to talk about their work and how it will impact the states in 2014. So thank you to the team at BISC, and thank you to all of you for joining, and we look forward to speaking with you next Thursday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.